Leo Narrations is back, and this one's for anyone who's ever been handed a bill for a life they weren't actually invited to keep living in. Stay to the end, this one earns it, then tell me in the comments if you've ever been in that room, and subscribe if you want the next one when it drops. Now, rewind with me. 3 weeks before any of this happened, an invitation landed in my inbox, paid for with money I recognized as my own. I made a couple of calls nobody at that party would find out about until much later, and got dressed like a man walking into his own ending. Everyone in that room that night had already decided how the story was supposed to go. I just hadn't told them I'd read the ending first. I pulled up outside Amber and Oak at exactly 7:11, 11 minutes late on purpose. Elaine had texted me 4 times that afternoon about punctuality, about how tonight would set the tone for everything that came next, about how the whole city was going to be watching. She had no idea just how true that last part was about to become. Amber and Oak was the name she'd picked for her restaurant, high-end American fusion, tucked into a converted warehouse on the edge of the gulch. The kind of place where a plate of scallops costs more than most people's dinner for four. She'd spent 20 months chasing this, agonizing over the color of the napkins and the grain of the reclaimed wood on the bar, and I had funded every choice with money she believed was hers to keep forever. The valet glanced at my sedan the way you glance at something that wandered into the wrong neighborhood, then handed me a ticket and drove it off to park it somewhere out of sight of the Range Rovers and the German sedans already lined up along the curb. I'd bought that car 8 years ago and never once felt the need to replace it. Say what you want about that honestly. I straightened my jacket, a charcoal suit I'd worn because if tonight was going to be the last time I stood in a room with these people, I wanted to look like a man who'd chosen to be there. Above the entrance, the restaurant's name glowed in brushed brass letters against reclaimed cedar siding, lit just enough to look expensive without looking like it was trying. Through the tall windows, I could see the dining room already full, servers moving between tables with trays of past appetizers, a string trio tucked into the corner by the bar. 20 months of planning had gone into that window, and standing on the sidewalk in the cold for a second, I let myself admit it looked exactly like what she'd promised everyone it would. That was almost the saddest part of the whole evening. The moment I walked through the door, I felt the room notice me. Conversations didn't stop, but they thinned out, got quieter and more careful, the way a room gets when everyone in it already knows something you supposedly don't. Heads turned. Smiles appeared, the kind that never made it up to anyone's eyes. I recognized most of the faces. Culinary school classmates and borrowed Chef Whites. A cluster of investors who'd written checks because Elaine had a way of making people feel like they were funding something inevitable. A couple of local food writers already working on their second glass of champagne, looking bored in the specific way people look bored when they're deciding how unkind to be in print. And scattered through all of it, friends we'd hosted for dinner a dozen times, people who'd sat across from us and laughed at things I'd said, now watching me cross the room like I was a joke they'd already heard the punchline to. A couple we'd vacationed with twice gave me a small wave and then found somewhere else to look. The particular kind of avoidance that only happens when people already know how a story ends and don't want to be caught enjoying it. Near the Raw Bar, one of the investors, a silver-haired man named Douglas Ferris, who'd put in $200,000 because Elaine had a way of making a spreadsheet sound like a love letter, caught my eye and lifted his glass in a toast that felt more like a dare than a greeting. Two of the food writers stood close enough to the bar that I caught the word overpriced twice before I even ordered a drink, and neither of them looked like they meant it as a compliment. I went to the bar. The bartender, young, maybe 22, working hard at looking like he belonged somewhere this expensive, asked what he could get me. Whiskey? Neat, make it a double. While he poured, a voice behind me, pitched just loud enough to carry, said, "The temporary husband actually came." Laughter followed it. Easy laughter, the kind that only happens when everyone already agrees on the joke. I didn't turn around. I picked up the glass and let the first sip sit in my chest a second before I swallowed it. Temporary husband. That was the phrase, apparently, like I'd been a placeholder the whole time, something she was using until the real version of her life showed up. "There you are." Elaine's voice, bright in a way that didn't match her face. She was in a black dress I'd never seen, bought for tonight, probably with money from an account she thought I didn't watch closely. "You're late," she said. "Traffic," I said. "Place looks good. You should be proud." Something crossed her face, gone before I could name it. "We need to talk. Privately." She didn't wait to see if I'd follow. She turned and walked toward a door near the back marked private, and I went after her, aware of every set of eyes tracking the two of us across the room. The whispering started before the door even closed behind us. The office was small, a desk, two chairs, a filing cabinet, nothing built for comfort. She shut the door and the noise of the party dropped to a low hum on the other side of the wall. "I'm glad you came," she said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. "Wouldn't have missed it," I said. 20 months of planning, $12 million, big night. Her jaw tightened. "About that, there are some things we need to talk through." "Things?" She opened a drawer and took out a manila envelope, held it a second like she was reconsidering, then set it on the desk between us. "I think we both know this hasn't been working in a while." I picked my whiskey back up and didn't say anything. She wanted a reaction, an argument, something she could point to later and say, "See, I tried. He made this impossible." I gave her the silence instead. "I've had papers drawn up," she said. "Clean separation. You keep your own accounts. I keep the restaurant. We split the rest fairly. No fighting, no drama. Just two people admitting something didn't work. You're divorcing me on your restaurant's opening night. I'm starting something new," she said. "Tonight's the first official event here. It felt right. Symbolic." "That's one word for it," I said. She pushed the envelope an inch closer to me. "Just sign it and go, Elaine." She caught herself, annoyed. Started again. "Just sign it and go, Daniel. Let's not make this uglier than it has to be." "There are 200 people out there expecting a toast in 20 minutes, she added, glancing at the door like she could already hear them. "I need this settled before then." "Then I'll try to keep up," I said. "You told people I was your temporary husband." Her eyes widened just slightly, the first real reaction I'd gotten. "Who told you that? Does it matter if it's true?" She looked away. "People exaggerate. I might have said something about needing a different kind of partnership, about growth, about being good enough to fund the dream but not good enough to stay for it." "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be," she said again, like the sentence was load-bearing. "You've had a good life with me. This isn't about you not being enough. It's about what I need now." I opened the envelope. Standard dissolution paperwork, fair in his face. No alimony because we both had incomes of our own. Clean, reasonable, exactly the kind of document she could show her lawyer and her friends and have them all agree she'd been more than fair. What none of them knew was that every dollar that had gone into Amber and Oak, from the build-out and the equipment to the liquor license bond and the lease itself, had gone in as secured debt, not as a gift. Default language she'd signed 16 months earlier, back when she was too excited about tile samples to read past the signature line. I took a pen from my jacket. "You're sure this is what you want?" "Completely sure," she said. I signed every page without reading a word of it, quick, even strokes. She visibly relaxed, like she'd been holding her breath for an argument that never came. "That's it then," I said, sliding the pages back across the desk. She checked each signature like she didn't quite believe it had been that easy. "Thank you for being mature about this. 2 questions before I go," I said. "Does Jonah know you're doing this tonight?" Her face didn't move fast enough to hide it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "And did you ever actually read what you signed 16 months ago when I put the money in?" That one landed differently. Something flickered behind her eyes, the first real crack in the composure she'd walked in with. "What are you talking about?" "Enjoy your evening," I said, and walked out. "Wait," she said, following me to the door of the office. "People are going to ask where you went. What am I supposed to tell them?" "Tell them the truth," I said. "Or don't. I stopped being responsible for what you tell people about an hour ago." I made my way back through the dining room, and the conversations thinned out again as I passed, the same way they had when I arrived. Douglas Ferris caught my eye once more near the raw bar, his glass a little emptier now, and this time he didn't bother lifting it. The temporary husband was leaving, right on schedule. I handed my ticket to the valet outside and waited for my car, looking back through the glass at the party still going, at Elaine already being pulled into another round of congratulations, none of them aware of what was coming. I hadn't found out about any of it by accident. 8 months earlier, Elaine had started coming home past 1 in the morning with an explanation about a supplier tasting that ran long. A supplier tasting at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday. I nodded, said goodnight, and filed it away. Jonah Kessler was 31, hired as executive chef 9 months into the planning after a regional magazine ran a feature calling him one of the chefs to watch in the Southeast. Elaine justified the salary by telling me talent costs money, and if we wanted the restaurant to be taken seriously, We needed someone the critics already respected. What she never justified was the weekend trips to test kitchens 2 states over, or the pattern of late Tuesdays and Thursdays that hardened into a routine, or the charge from a boutique downtown for something I never once saw at home. None of it was proof on its own. A late night here, a receipt there, the kind of thing you can talk yourself out of for months if you want to badly enough. I didn't want to. Not after the fourth or fifth time the story stopped lining up with the calendar. I started keeping my own quiet list, dates against explanations, the way I'd track a stock that kept missing its own guidance. Petty, probably. I did it anyway. By the third month, the pattern wasn't subtle to anyone who was actually paying attention. I just happened to be the only one who was. I'd built an investment fund worth $46 million over 11 years by paying close attention to patterns and trusting my read on numbers that didn't add up, starting with $80,000 of my own savings and a handful of clients willing to bet on someone with no track record yet. A marriage is just another set of numbers if you're honest with yourself about it. So 6 months before that night, I hired a man named Walter Doyle, ex-FBI, running a small investigative practice that did the kind of quiet, careful work most people hope they never need. I told him I wanted confirmation before I made any decisions, nothing more. He came back to me 4 months before the opening with a full packet. Photographs of Elaine and Jonah leaving a hotel off Broadway together. Text messages that used words like our future and how much longer do we have to keep pretending. Doyle apologized when he handed it over, the way people do when they're sorry for someone else's marriage. I told him to keep going, because if she was planning to leave, I needed to understand exactly how, and more specifically, what she thought she was going to take with her when she did. Doyle met me at a diner off Elliston Place to hand over that first packet, sliding the folder across a formica table like it weighed more than it looked like it should. "I'm sorry, man," he said. "This part's never easy." I told him it was fine, that I'd rather know for certain than keep guessing, and I meant it more than I expected to when the words came out. He nodded like he'd heard that same sentence from 100 men who hadn't quite meant it either. That was how I found the divorce paperwork she'd already had drafted 2 months before the opening, filed quietly with her own attorney, waiting for the right room and the right audience. She thought divorcing me in front of 200 people was a kind of statement, an act of reinvention rather than a betrayal dressed up as one. Reframe herself as the woman who took control of her own story. Let me be the cautionary footnote everyone felt a little sorry for while they admired her for moving on. What she hadn't accounted for was that I'd structured every dollar of the $12 million as secured lending to the business entity, never as a gift and never as marital property. The loan agreement she'd signed 16 months earlier, back when she was too thrilled to slow down and read anything, included a recall clause that activated the moment the borrower engaged in fraud, misrepresentation, or used the borrowed funds in connection with an undisclosed personal relationship that compromised the lender's interests. An affair funded in part by business accounts, at a business she'd solicited investment for while quietly planning to end our marriage, qualified on every count. The lease was in my name because her credit score, 615, didn't clear the landlord's threshold on its own. The equipment financing listed me as primary obligor. The liquor bond, the business insurance, all of it ran through paperwork with my signature on it, because banks and vendors don't extend that kind of trust to a 35-year-old with a dream and no collateral of her own. She'd built her new life on a foundation I owned, and I was about to take the foundation back. Sitting in my car outside Amber and Oak, waiting for the valet, I made the first call. "Harold, it's Daniel. Execute the withdrawal. All of it, every account tied to the restaurant, tonight." "You're certain," Harold Bennett said, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. "She signed the papers an hour ago," I said, completely certain. By 9:40 that night, Harold confirmed the operating and reserve accounts for Amber and Oak would be emptied by 11:30. He'd also canceled every automatic payment scheduled for the next 30 days, payroll, vendors, utilities, insurance. The restaurant would technically still exist tomorrow. It just wouldn't be able to do anything. At 10:05, my attorney, Preston Callahan, called to confirm he was filing an emergency motion to freeze our joint accounts pending the divorce, citing the risk of asset dissipation, and that formal notice had gone to the landlord regarding my position as personal guarantor on the lease. "She's going to find out fast that the lease was never really hers to lose," Preston said. "It was always yours to take back." At 10:30, Walter Doyle texted to confirm the evidence packets had gone out to 2 people, her business partner, Georgia Pruitt, and her father, Arthur Prescott. Each packet carried the same material: the affair timeline, the hotel receipts, and the fact that Elaine had solicited Georgia's investment months after the affair had already started. Each call lasted under 2 minutes. Between them, I sat in the driver's seat of my car in the lot outside Amber and Oak, engine running, watching guests still trickling in through the front doors under the brass letters, none of them aware the actual event of the evening was happening 40 feet away in a parked sedan. By the time I got back to my building, the Adelicia on 12th Avenue South, three separate pieces of a plan I'd spent 5 months assembling were already moving on their own. I took the elevator up, poured a whiskey, and sat by the window with the skyline laid out below me, half expecting to feel something more than I did. Mostly I felt like a man watching weather move in over a city he no longer had to stand outside in. My phone sat on the side table, lighting up every few minutes. I let it. The first missed call came in around 9:50, before I'd even reached the garage. By 10:15, there were 22. A text under the pile read, "Why aren't you answering? We need to talk about something with the accounts." By 11, the count had climbed to 51, and the text had changed tone. "This isn't funny. Call me back. What did you do? The bank is saying there's a hold on everything." Around 58, the tone shifted again. "My father won't answer either. What did you send him?" I could tell by then she was starting to understand this wasn't only about the money anymore. By a little past midnight, the number sitting on my lock screen read 78, and the most recent message, sent 4 minutes earlier, just said, "Please, Daniel, just talk to me." I set the phone face down and finished my drink. 78 missed calls in 3 hours is its own kind of confession, and I intended to let her sit inside it a while longer. The knock came at 12:14. Not tentative. The kind of knocking that means someone's world has come apart and they need an answer immediately. I checked the camera by the door. Elaine stood in the hallway, still in the black dress, mascara run down under both eyes, hair falling loose out of whatever careful style it had started the night in. I let her knock twice more before I opened it. She pushed past me into the apartment without waiting to be asked. "What did you do?" Her voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. "The accounts are empty, all of them. $12 million gone, just gone." I closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. Gone's the wrong word. Withdrawn. It was mine to start with. I loaned it to a business under specific terms, and those terms just got triggered tonight. That's my money. That's the restaurant's operating capital. "It was always my money," I said. "You borrowed it. You signed agreements acknowledging exactly how. I'm exercising the recall clause. Preston can walk you through the specifics if you want to pay him $400 an hour for information you should have read before you signed it." Her face cycled fast, confusion into anger into something closer to panic. "You're destroying my restaurant because you're upset about a divorce. I'm protecting an investment because the borrower committed fraud," I said. "You solicited money for a business while planning to leave the person funding it. You used borrowed funds in connection with an affair that compromised the terms of the loan. Pick whichever one bothers you least. They both hold up." "An affair," she repeated, and then the understanding actually landed on her face. "You knew. This whole time. You knew about Jonah." "For 8 months," I said. "Doyle found the two of you at a hotel off Broadway back in the spring. I have the photographs if you'd like a refresher." She sank onto my couch like her legs had simply stopped being willing to hold her up. 8 months. You've known for 8 months and you said nothing." "You were busy planning your exit," I said. "I was busy planning mine. The difference is mine actually worked." "This is cruel," she said. "You're being deliberately cruel to me." "No, I'm being precise. Cruel would have been confronting you the night I found out, making a scene, handing you a story you could turn into sympathy. This is business. You wanted a clean separation, remember? No drama, no fighting. Two adults admitting something didn't work." "There are people who depend on that restaurant," she said. "Staff. Vendors who extended credit. My parents put their retirement into it." "Your parents will be fine," I said. "I'm structuring a repayment plan that protects what they put in, because they were innocent in this. The staff and the vendors you should have thought about before you decided humiliating me in front of 200 people was worth the applause." My phone rang. I glanced at the screen, put it on speaker. "Preston, go ahead." "The papers she filed have a problem," Preston Callahan said, his voice filling the room. "She listed Amber and Oak as a marital asset for community property purposes. But since it's actually a business built on recalled secured debt, its current value is zero, and once you factor in the lease default and the vendor exposure, it's negative. Tennessee is equitable distribution, not community property, and courts still weigh conduct. The affair, plus the recall, is going to make her attorney's morning very unpleasant. Thanks, Preston. Send the preliminary filing over in the morning. I hung up. What about the staff? She said, quieter now, some of the anger draining into something closer to exhaustion. Two of them gave notice at their old jobs to come work for me. They believed in this. Then they believed in the wrong plan, I said. Not necessarily the wrong person to build it with, just the wrong plan. You could have told me you knew, she said. Months ago, instead of letting me walk into that room tonight and humiliate myself in front of everyone we know. You didn't need my help humiliating yourself, I said. You did that the moment you decided a public divorce was good marketing. She wiped under her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing what was left of the makeup further. Is there anything I could have said tonight that would have stopped this? Not tonight, I said. 16 months ago, maybe, if you'd read what you signed instead of just admiring the signature line. 8 months ago, maybe, if you told me the truth instead of a supplier tasting that ran until 1 in the morning. By tonight, all you had left was the exit, and you'd already chosen it before you walked through that door. Elaine was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time in 5 years. You're taking all of it, she said. The restaurant, the money, my ability to even fight this. I'm leaving you with exactly what you earned, I said, which, if we're being accurate, is a fairly expensive lesson in consequences. I made a mistake, she said. People make mistakes. You made a series of decisions over 8 months, I said. Lying, spending, planning a public exit designed to make me look small in front of people we used to call friends. That's not a mistake. That's a character reveal. She stood up fast, angry now instead of desperate. You're doing this because your ego is bruised, because you can't stand that I fell in love with someone else. I actually laughed at that. You didn't fall in love with Jonah. You fell in love with the version of your life that had a celebrity chef and a restaurant with your name over the door. He was the accessory that made the picture complete. You don't know anything about what I feel. I know Jonah stopped answering your calls about 20 minutes ago, I said. Right around the time Doyle's packet reached Georgia, and Georgia told him exactly what's coming. She pulled her phone out with shaking hands, checked something, and whatever she saw confirmed it. No, he wouldn't just... Funny how fast it disappears once the money does, I said. She sat back down, all the fight draining out of her at once. How can you be this cold? I was your wife. 5 years. And you threw those 5 years away the first night you checked into that hotel, I said. You made your choice back in the spring. I'm just making sure you experience all of it, not just the parts you planned for. What am I supposed to do now? I have nothing. No money, no business. Figure it out, I said. The same way I did when I had nothing. Build something. Earn it. Do it somewhere you're not using the people who trust you. I walked to the door and opened it. We're done here. She got up slowly, like standing hurt, and stopped in the doorway to look back at me. I never wanted to hurt you. You wanted to humiliate me at your own launch party, I said. You wanted a room full of people watching you set the temporary husband down and pick up the better version of your life. You wanted the applause more than you cared what it cost. She didn't answer that. She just left, and I watched on the camera as she walked down the hallway, shoulders shaking, the whole thing finally catching up to her at once. I closed the door, poured out what was left in my glass, and stood at the window for a long while without pouring another. My phone had gone quiet somewhere around 1 in the morning, the calls finally stopping instead of just going unanswered. Outside, the city kept doing what it always did on a weeknight, cabs circling, a siren somewhere a few blocks off, none of it pausing to notice that one very specific marriage had just ended for good, 3 hours after it had already ended on paper. The next 10 days went the way I expected them to. Amber and Oak never opened for a single night of regular service. Staff showed up that Monday to a locked door and a notice from the landlord citing default. By Wednesday, 2 vendors had filed liens against the business. A produce distributor owed just under $30,000, and the company that had installed the kitchen's ventilation system, still waiting on the back half of an $18,000 invoice. By Friday, a local food blog ran a carefully worded piece under the headline, Highly Anticipated Gulch Restaurant Shutters Before First Regular Service, Financial Irregularities Cited. The article couldn't say much more than that without a lawyer's blessing. The comment section had no such limits, and it filled in the parts about a temporary husband who'd apparently seen the whole thing coming. One comment, posted under a name that clearly wasn't real, read simply, I was at that party. Ask her what temporary means now. By the following week, it had over 400 replies. In the days right after, people I hadn't heard from in years started texting to check on me, distant cousins, old college roommates, a former neighbor from 3 moves ago, all of them suddenly very concerned about how I was holding up. I answered most of them the same way. I'm fine. It's a long story. One former coworker just sent a single line, "Is it true she called you her temporary husband at the party?" And I typed out 3 different responses before deleting all of them and sending nothing at all. I didn't tell any of it the way I'm telling it now. Not to anyone. 3 weeks after the opening, I met Georgia Pruitt at a Frothy Monkey in 12 South. She'd put $65,000 of her own savings into the restaurant and wanted to understand what had happened. I slid a folder across the table. The timeline, the hotel receipts, the fact that Elaine had taken Georgia's investment months after the affair had already started. Georgia read through it without saying anything for a while. "She told us you were controlling," Georgia finally said, "that this was about you trying to sabotage her independence." "I'm sure she did," I said. "It's an easier story than admitting she spent 8 months lying to everyone who trusted her." "My 65,000 is gone," Georgia said. "The business has liabilities north of 150,000 over assets," I said. "You're not getting it back, and neither is anyone else, except her parents. I'm protecting their peace because they were genuinely innocent in this." "You did what most people do," I said. "You trusted the story instead of checking the foundation underneath it. I only caught it because I was already looking for a different reason." Georgia closed the folder and stood to leave. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. We should have looked harder at her character and not just her business plan." 5 weeks after the opening, Elaine's father, Arthur Prescott, asked to meet me at Centennial Park near the Parthenon replica on a cold, clear morning. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks. "I came to thank you," he said, hands in his coat pockets, watching a couple joggers pass, "for structuring the repayment plan. We'd have lost the house without it." "You were innocent," I said. "You believed in your daughter. That shouldn't cost you your retirement." "She called and asked if we'd co-sign a new lease for her," he said. "I told her no. I raised her to understand integrity, to keep her word, to treat people with respect. And she traded all of it for a fancy restaurant and a chef who ran the second things got hard." "Some lessons can't be taught," I said. "They have to be lived through." He nodded slowly. "You could have gone further. Sued her outright, made sure she never worked in this business again. You didn't." "That would have been revenge," I said. "I wasn't interested in revenge. I just stopped being willing to pay for something I didn't do." He watched a couple of runners loop past the reflecting pool before he spoke again. "She's proud," he said finally. "Too proud to ask for help from the people who'd actually give it to her, honestly. I don't know where that comes from." "Neither do I said. "I don't think it's something either of us can fix for her at this point." 11 weeks after the papers were filed in her attorney's office, the divorce was finalized. Preston walked me through the last of it in his office at the Pinnacle downtown, sliding a final settlement summary across his desk instead of a manila envelope this time. Amber and Oak's trademark and remaining fixtures reverted to me as the registered guarantor once the vendor debts were settled out of the liquidated equipment. I had no interest in reopening it under any name and told Preston to file the abandonment paperwork instead. Her parents' repayment plan was already 3 installments in, on schedule, exactly as promised. Elaine wasn't there for the signing. Her own attorney handled it and sent her signature over separately, probably because taking an afternoon off from a hostess job wasn't something she could easily arrange anymore. A few weeks after that, I drove past a small bistro on Main Street in East Nashville and saw her through the front window in a plain black uniform, seating a couple at a two-top, that same practiced smile on her face, a little more tired than I remembered it. Our eyes met for a couple of seconds through the glass. Neither of us did anything with it. I kept driving. It wasn't satisfaction I felt watching her through that window. It was closer to the quiet, unremarkable feeling of weather finally clearing after a long stretch of rain. Nothing worth celebrating. Just something I'd been waiting to be done. 9 months after the divorce was final, I sold my fund to a larger firm for $58 million. I'd already started sketching out what came next, a smaller advisory practice. Fewer clients, more of my own capital in play. The kind of work that let me choose exactly who I trusted with it going forward. The deal closed on a Thursday, and that evening, I was sitting on my balcony at the Adelicia when an unknown number called. I almost let it go. It's me, she said, quieter than I remembered her ever sounding. I heard about the sale. Congratulations. Thank you, I said. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I wasn't sure either, I said. Habit, maybe. Silence stretched between us for a moment. I wanted to apologize, she said. Not because I expect anything back, because you deserve to actually hear it. I was wrong about all of it. The way I treated you, the choices I made, thinking that moving forward meant leaving behind the person who got me there. I appreciate you saying that, I said. Jonah's engaged now, she said. Someone else. He landed a job at a hotel restaurant in Atlanta about a month after everything fell apart and never looked back. I saw the engagement online, same as everyone else. Turns out you had him figured out before I did. I usually do when it comes to people's motives. I'm managing a small place now, she said. Nothing like what I had planned, but it's honest work, and I'm not cutting corners or using anyone to build it. It'll take years to get anywhere close to where I wanted to be. Maybe that's the point of it. Maybe it is, I said. Do you ever wonder what we could have been if I hadn't blown it up the way I did? I looked out at the skyline for a second before I answered. No, because the person I thought I married wouldn't have done any of it. I was married to someone who didn't actually exist yet. She was quiet for a moment. That's fair, she said finally. Goodbye, Daniel. I hope you find someone who deserves what you're willing to give. I hope you become someone who deserves what people are willing to give you, I said. The line went dead. I sat there for a minute with the phone still warm in my hand before I finally deleted her number, then poured the last of the whiskey and looked out over a city that had no idea any of this had ever happened. It hadn't slowed down for a single day of it. Somewhere out there, a restaurant was closing tonight and another one was opening tomorrow, and neither would remember either of us by next year. She'd called me temporary once, in front of 200 people who laughed like it was the best joke they'd heard all year. None of them were around anymore to see how it actually ended. Honestly, I preferred it that way. Some things you'd rather nobody else got to watch. I raised my glass anyway, to an empty balcony, to a skyline that didn't owe me a thing. To new beginnings, I said, out loud, to no one. Not the kind somebody hands you at their own launch party, dressed up as a favor. The kind you stay up all night earning yourself, whether or not anyone's still around to see it.